Okay, this is your mini lecture for Chapter 6 on learning and performance management. Here are the learning outcomes. You may pause here to read them. First, we're going to start looking at some theories of learning and how we learn. So one is called classical conditioning, and basically you're modifying a behavior by pairing a conditioned stimulus with an unconditioned stimulus to elicit an unconditioned response. Let me explain. I have this dog here, and you may have heard about Pavlov's dog. So basically, Pavlov had a dog, and he would ring a bell and give the dog a treat or a meat. I think they said in the book. And he kept doing this. So every time he rang the bell, the dog would get food. And eventually, every time they rang the bell, he would salivate because he was anticipating that he would get food. So classical conditioning is this idea that we can teach people or condition them to do things by giving them this stimulus and then eventually taking it away. Operant conditioning is modifying behavior through the use of positive or negative consequences. I think this is the one that we probably see the most in the workplace. So we use things like reinforcement, punishment, and extinction strategies to influence behavior. So reinforcement is when we try to encourage a desirable behavior by giving a positive consequence or withholding a negative consequence. So for example, if somebody did well on a presentation in the office, he would say, "Good job on your presentation." Um, that is an example of reinforcement. It could also be that if somebody did well on the presentation, and I'm not saying this is effective, but maybe you wouldn't say good job, but you also wouldn't criticize them, so you would withhold a negative consequence. Punishment discourages undesirable behavior by giving a negative consequence or withholding a positive consequence. I think we all see this in childbearing, or even in the workplace. Maybe in the workplace, it might be if you're late for work 3 times, you're going to get written up and a note will be made in your file. And if that continues, you will lose your job. An extinction is weakening behavior by attaching no consequences to it. So if somebody is very sarcastic and they make a sarcastic comment, you would not make a comment on it. But if somebody who is very sarcastic makes a very positive comment that contributes to the conversation, you'd be like, oh, that's a really positive outlook. Thank you for sharing that. So you would give them positive reinforcement and you wouldn't even acknowledge the negative. So, and you can see this reinforcement and punishment strategies where with reinforcement, if we have a positive consequence, we're applying a reward, and here we're withholding. So, you can kind of look at this and read more about it as well. All right, so we're going to look at social and cognitive theories of learning. So Bandura's social learning theory says that learning occurs when one observes others and models their behavior. And I think we see this. We see this with young children. We see this in the workplace when people model other people. And so we have this term called task-specific self-efficacy. And this is our internal expectancy to perform a specific task effectively. So how likely do we think we are going to be able to, how likely do we feel that we will be able to perform that task? And so what is our prior experiences? What is the persuasion for other people? And what is the assessment of our current physical and emotional capabilities? And that's going to impact our self-efficacy and our ability or perceived ability to perform that task. All right, so there's some different personal functions of learning and really how we learn. So they talk about intuitors. They prefer theoretical frameworks. They look for meaning in material and attempt to understand the big picture. Sensors, they prefer very specific data. They look for practical applications and attempt to master details of a subject. They look for what's very realistic and doable. Thinkers like to analyze data and information. They work to be fair-minded and even-handed. They seek logical, just conclusions, but they don't like to be too personally involved. And feelers prefer interpersonal involvement. They want to be tender-hearted. They want to be harmonious. They want to seek subjective, merciful results, and they don't like objective, factual analysis. So we all fall somewhere in here, all right? And this is going to impact how we learn. So understanding that can help you to understand how you learn or others in the organization learn. Explain how goal setting can be used to direct learning and performance. I think we all know that goal setting can be very beneficial. Goals will help to guide and direct behavior and help us to achieve outcomes. Goals should be very, what we call SMART goals. I don't know if you've ever heard that, but they're very specific. You can measure them. There's something we can do. They're attainable in a certain time period. They're realistic. It's realistic we can achieve that. And they will be achieved by a certain time period. Goals can increase motivation and job performance by giving people goals, reduce stress because people understand what's expected of them, and improve the accuracy and validity of our performance evaluation. So if we know what we're supposed to be doing and we do it and then we're evaluated on that, that is just the best situation. All right, so next we're going to look at job performance. So performance management is really defining, measuring, appraising, and providing feedback on performance. I'm sure we've all had a review or performance appraisal. And this is just a sample performance appraisal. And what I like is that, performance appraisals should be done to give you feedback on what you're doing good and what you can improve. And there are different ways we can do this. One is through 360-degree feedback. And this is you evaluate yourself, all right? Your manager evaluates you, your peers evaluate you, people who report to you evaluate you, and your customers. So it's a really well-rounded view of how you're performing in a variety of different areas. And an effective appraisal system should help people to develop and to help them to make them better. There should be an establishment of trust between the supervisor and employees. And an effective appraisal system should be valid. A good scale is used. It should be reliable. There should be some flexibility, and it should be equitable among all people. You shouldn't have one appraisal system for one person and one for another person. Managers can reward performance in a variety of ways. There's individual reward systems where it only directly affects one individual. And that can encourage competition, which can be good in some situations, but it can also be bad. And then there's a team reward system where you encourage cooperation, joint efforts, and the sharing of information and expertise. Situations when you will want to use individual performance or reward systems, and times you'll want to use team reward systems. In some situations where, like, let's say somebody is selling, if their performance, let's say they sell TVs, you'll probably use an individual reward system because it'll be that person primarily selling it. But let's say somebody sells a really high priced item and they have to sell it as a team, then you would want to use a team reward system in that situation. Let's look at some strategies for correcting poor performance. So managers often will have individuals who can improve, we'll say. And so we have to look at informational cues. So things like information collected from cues such as consensus, distinctiveness, and consistency, and then internal or external attributions. And I'm actually just going to go to the next slide. So we observe there's poor performance, all right? That's the first thing. Then we find, then there are informational cues, all right? And then we need to determine if those were internal or external causes for that poor performance. So we have the poor performance. We look for consensus, consistency, and distinctiveness. And I'll give you an example next. And we determine if it's internal, external, and what the sources of responsibility were, and then how we respond to that. So here's an example. A customer has complained about Nikki, all right? There are no complaints about other employees, so that's low consensus, right? Nikki has received similar complaints in bad past jobs, low distinctiveness. Nikki complaints about Nikki have been coming in consistently, high consistency. So we can say this is internal to Nikki, and Nikki's behavior stems mainly from internal causes. So how do we fix that then, right? Well, we can do training, etc. Then we know it's not an issue within the external or within the company. Here, Sanjay has performed poorly on collections or maybe collecting money. Other employees are also performing poorly. Sanjay performs poorly only on this task, otherwise Sanjay does well. And most of the time Sanjay handles collections well. So we can say, well, obviously something is going on because we're having an issue with a lot of people performing poorly on this. So we know that this is an external cause and we need to handle it accordingly. This is not necessarily Sanjay's fault, right? And so taking that process to really look at all of the issues can really help you to make an informed decision about how to take corrective action. Some ways that we can take corrective action are through mentoring. We can have mentoring for a variety of reasons, including having somebody to learn from somebody. I have mentors who help me with different aspects of my job to help me to become better. Coaching usually relates specifically to the job, so we can help people to do better in their job through coaching and training. And counseling is usually refers to something outside of your work performance to help you to deal with things that maybe are happening in your personal life, which you may inadvertently bring to work, and you may and so if we can deal with those things in our personal life, it'll help the person to be more perform better in the work environment. All right. So that's your mini lecture for chapter 6. If you have any questions, let me know.